Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a special partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Sunday, January 15th, 2023. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide in this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. And if you bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Hawaii and Alaska to the lower left. If you point and click anywhere on this map, it'll bring up the most current forecast with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories. And looking at the map this Sunday afternoon, the most notable thing is that a couple of storms that have pushed across California into the southwestern quadrant of the lower 48. It's now crossing the Intermountain region into the lower Rockies and emerging into the plains. So we have a number of winter weather advisories, winter storm warnings, and things at least should tentatively quiet down a little bit in California, though there'll be another impulse swinging through there later on tonight and early in the week. So not completely done there with the western U.S., but the pattern will be shifting and changing a bit here in the upcoming weekend and through next weekend as we head through the end of the month. Still some areas of wind along the northwest and western coast causing blowing snow, reduced visibilities, where winter weather advisories are in effect into the day on Sunday. There was an enhanced aurora display last night. We got a photo out of Fairbanks National Weather Service office, and there is a telescopic comet that could be brightening in the northern sky, possibly becoming visible to the unaided eye late this month or in the beginning of February. Not a guarantee. The Pacific storm track is going to be reorienting and start to impact the Gulf Coast here as we go into the upcoming week and in through the latter half of this month, as temperatures are expected to moderate with above normal precipitation setting up here across areas of the mainland here through the latter half of January. Well, looking at some of the FAA webcams this afternoon, we have snow and blowing snow, temperature 9 below zero, winds gusting over 30 miles an hour at Point Lay for a rather chilly afternoon there. And again, that's the area that is currently under a winter weather advisory for the blowing snow. Dillingham in the southwest part of the state has been picking up some light snow and fog, a temperature at 28 degrees as a low pressure is affecting that area coming across the central Alaska Peninsula. And then as we look toward areas of the northern Gulf, Valdez picking up some light snow and fog. Temperature there, though, is at 30 degrees. And some more snows are going to be affecting that region here as the storm track gets reoriented and we start to see more moisture and fronts coming up into the north central Gulf here over the next couple of weeks. Juneau reporting a little bit of a light mix of rain and snow, a little bit of fog and temperatures there this afternoon, a couple degrees above freezing. So the Panhandle will also get on into some more active weather here in the week ahead. So here are the current advisories we have until midnight. A couple of winter weather advisories, mainly for the Dalton and Elliott Highway passes for some blowing snow. Visibilities could be reduced down to near or below a half a mile as north and east winds gust as high as 30 to 35 miles an hour. So that's in effect until midnight this Saturday night. And then we have the winter weather advisories along the northwest coast, Wainwright down through Point Hope, Kivalina, Shishmaref, and down there to Teller, Wales, and including St. Lawrence Island, where again blowing snow will be an issue at times, along with some falling snow. A few areas could pick up an inch or two of additional snowfall tonight into Sunday morning. But otherwise, last evening there was an aurora display. I talked about that potential, and here is on the planetary K index that indication of a minor geomagnetic storm Saturday evening. And behind me here is the image taken by Jim Brader of the National Weather Service office there in Fairbanks. You can see that nice greenish white glow of the aurora in the background there through the trees. And we expect here coming up here in the next week and the following weekend, if solar activity can hurl another disturbance, we might see some additional displays of the northern lights coming up. Now, another thing is there is a comet. It's not visible to the unaided eye, but it is in the northern sky. Its position as of this Sunday night will be between Vega, this bright star there, and Arcturus, and then to the lower left of the Big Dipper in the northeastern sky. Still, you need to have a telescope or a good pair of binoculars, and it's just going to appear as a fuzzball, especially through binoculars. But there's a potential for this comet to brighten to maybe be visible by the unaided eye here toward the end of the month or early in February as it makes its closest approach to Earth. Now, here's an image of that telescopic comet taken by Dan Bartlett back around Christmas time. But again, it's not going to look like that if you step outside. Simply too faint of an object to be detected by the unaided eye. Looking at the satellite imagery, as I was talking about, the active weather zone is continues to be across the lower Bering here to the west through the Aleutians, cutting across the Alaska Peninsula and then extending back south of the Gulf. But this is going to begin to change the systems. There's going to be a piece of energy rotate out of the lower central Bering and then pass south of the Alaska Peninsula. It's going to enhance an area of low pressure here early in the week. That's going to fling another frontal band and more wind and precipitation to areas of the Panhandle on up along the Gulf Coast. And this pattern is going to begin to reestablish itself as we head through the latter half of this month. What it will eventually do is help to warm temperatures across much of the mainland, especially through the west, and also increase the chances of above normal precipitation. Right now it looks like here for that last week in January, the greatest threat for above normal precipitation will be in the western interior and along the west central coast. As you can imagine, if you start getting weather systems taking that moisture up here right off of the Bering and southwest to northeast flow would allow that to happen while temperatures moderate across much of the mainland. Here are the current surface map. We have that one low central peninsula with an occluded front extending ahead of it, another weak trough lingering along the Panhandle coast, creating some scattered lighter rain showers that mix at times with some snow. Brisker winds across the interior, responsible for that winter weather advisory, and also the brisk winds there along the northwest and west central coastlines of Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait. This low out here in the lower central Bering is a reflection of some upper level energy, and eventually later tonight into early Monday morning, these are going to kind of consolidate, and as we get into Monday afternoon, you can kind of see the low pressure trying to get reorganized here out over the lower southwestern portion of the Gulf and North Pacific, so that by Tuesday we expect low pressure to be there in the western Gulf, arcing ahead of it, an occluded front with a couple of frontal waves along it. That's going to enhance the precipitation, some heavier rain and even some accumulating snows there and through the mountains, and especially intercoastal mountains of the Panhandle and in through the north as we go through Tuesday and Wednesday, and that'll be the beginning of the pattern change. Also now a pretty good low with some decent precipitation with it south of the central Aleutians as we get into later Tuesday. So for in the meantime, temperatures stay above freezing for the southern outer Panhandle areas tonight. Inner areas not as cold as they've been, though still 5 below zero in the normally cold spots like Glen Allen. Temperatures on Monday afternoon back up into the lower mid 40s on the, say, Craig, Klawak, and then we could see temperatures approaching 30 in the Anchorage Bowl, and definitely above freezing as we go through Seward down through Homer. And then lows Tuesday morning, again, some moderation, generally above freezing, again, across the lower and outer Panhandle, as well as areas along the outer Gulf Coast, especially, like, say, Kodiak. But then temperatures similar to what they were on Monday. Readings back up at least lower 40s for the outer Panhandle. Only 6 above, though, in through the Copper River Basin. Now, cold temperatures are likely. The cold air has been sitting up here in the North Slope. We've had brisk winds. You could see readings below 20 below here. So combined with the wind will produce wind chills easily down below, around 40 below or better. And then Monday afternoon highs generally stay sub-zero north of the Yukon River, and especially centered there in the northwest. Some of the coldest air is going to be wrapping its way down along the west side, west central areas of the state through the Bering Strait. So the ice could shift around with that wind, but it's not anticipated to anything that does open up. Any polynyas, they'll refreeze. And looking at daytime highs Tuesday afternoon, generally at or below zero along north of the Yukon River. And then for the southwest, we're looking for lows tonight, 10 to 15 above, Anvik down through Bethel, 20s, Dillingham, King Salmon, and then extending out to near freezing there as we get to the Aleutians. Daytime highs Monday afternoon above freezing, Dillingham, King Salmon 36. Get readings mid-upper 30s there out through the Aleutian chain, and then lows Tuesday morning could be in the single digits to a little below zero as you creep up the middle Yukon Valley and upper Kuskokwim basins. And then for Tuesday afternoon, temperatures will stay a bit colder, generally in the teens across the southwest interior, near freezing, middle and upper portion of the Alaska Peninsula. And quickly, temperatures are expected to moderate here for that last week of January across much of the mainland as the pattern shifts. Winds become more southwest to northeast aloft, and that would increase the chances of precipitation averaging above normal across much of the mainland, with the centered on the west central interior and the west coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time for your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned Monday or on Tuesday, we're going to be seeing energy in the mid-levels of the atmosphere work its way from the lower Bering Sea across just south of the Alaska Peninsula. This is going to help spin up a stronger area of low pressure over the southwestern Gulf by Tuesday morning, with a frontal band pushing up into the north central Gulf Coast and affecting the Panhandle with some wind and precipitation. Meanwhile, though, to start out Monday morning, still IFR conditions along the Brooks Range, North Slope, eastern Arctic coast, as well as much of the southwest coast from Nome down along the Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas and in through Bristol Bay. By the time we get into Monday afternoon, still we see the general trend, some pockets, IFR there, southern as well as western northern Panhandle, northern Gulf Coast, including the east side of the Kenai and Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, and then again Kuskokwim Bay on up through St. Lawrence and the Bering Strait. Tuesday morning, still persistent IFR conditions along the spine of the Brooks Range, North Slope, eastern half of the Arctic coast. Little pockets of IFR, maybe up around Eagle and down toward the Copper River Basin. Also still rather extensive there through the Panhandle, and then certainly along the southwest coast from Bristol Bay all the way up past the Yukon Delta in through the Bering Strait. And by Tuesday afternoon, still IFR conditions persist in the same areas of the north, also along the Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait, down into areas of the southwest YK deltas, and then again out along the inner channels there of the Panhandle, as there'll be a frontal system and precipitation along with some windier conditions pushing up through that way. But passes coming up here for Monday, we expect Anaktuvik as well as Adigan Pass to be generally IFR, especially mid-pass on up into the North Slope. Further south, anticipating more in the way of MVFR conditions. As we go to the west arm of the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill, MVFR conditions are expected for Monday. Rainy Pass, IFR to start out, becoming MVFR. Right now it looks like Windy Pass should generally hold on to MVFR conditions on Monday. A little further east, Isabel could start out IFR, certainly be some IFR around to the west and southwest of Isabel Pass, but trying to give way to MVFR for the afternoon. And Mentasta Pass will be MVFR, trying to give way to VFR conditions as we go through Tuesday. Tanita Pass, MVFR, but becoming IFR. And as you go a little further south of there at Portage Pass, the eastern half of Portage Pass, including all of Prince William Sound, IFR conditions anticipated with MVFR there out toward the west entrance. Finally, far north end of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White, IFR conditions expected on Monday. And looking at the freezing levels, the surface freezing line runs out over the central Bering between St. Matthew, St. Paul, and down along the coast of the central northern Alaska Peninsula, out along the east side of the Kenai Peninsula, and up in the northern Gulf Coast, and then cutting back across into the inner channels, intercoastal mountains of the Panhandle in British Columbia. Freezing levels aloft bump up to 2,000 feet along the southwestern coast of the Panhandle to around and just above 4,000 feet in the vicinity of Haida Gwaii. Greatest threat for icing on Monday, considerable moderate icing possible areas, open waters of the northeastern Gulf. out over Prince William Sound, east side of the Kenai around Whittier, east side of Kodiak Island, and then an area just off of the Yukon Delta between St. Lawrence and St. Matthew, where icing could occur above 2,000 feet. Upper level jet stream winds are strongest. Just behind me, there's a core of northwesterly upper level jet stream winds of 145 knots at 30,000 feet. And we'll be watching energy associated with that feature working its way south and then eastward up into the lower Gulf by Tuesday. At 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, there will be a low pressure circulation there on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula with a broad area of stronger winds in the North Pacific, 50 to an excess of 60 knots. And then finally at 3,000 feet, the strongest winds on the map are actually over eastern Russia. There's also going to be a mid-level feature that works its way southwestward along the northwest Arctic coast Monday into Tuesday, and those brisk winds will continue. They are especially near the surface along areas like Point Hope, down through the lower Chukchi Sea, Bering Strait, west side of the Seward Peninsula, where we expect some considerable moderate turbulence, surface to 4,000 feet. Also areas of moderate turbulence in through the southwest, including the Cook entrance to Cook Inlet, north central Gulf Coast, maybe a little off of the southwestern Panhandle coast, surface to 5,000 feet, and then a broad area, especially back through the central Aleutians, surface to 3,000.
We try to provide everyone with the best forecast we can for snow, sleet, and ice in the winter with as much notice as we can. And we've made great strides in our forecasting over the years. However, given the complexity in winter weather forecasting, the first forecast simply won't be as good as the one closer to the event. As the event nears, our forecasts will become more precise.
Forecasts are updated constantly from days before the event until the precipitation actually begins. If you want the most accurate and up-to-date information, you have to check the forecast frequently.
It's very unlikely that any computer model snow amount forecast, especially days in advance, will be exactly right. Sometimes it's even difficult to forecast amounts the day of the event. Don't focus so much on exact numbers. Our forecast offices produce a range of possibilities available on each office's winter page.
Impacts from winter storms can vary a lot across even short distances, especially true in the terrain of the mountains, but even in areas with more subtle differences in elevation. Just because it's not bad where you are doesn't mean that it isn't bad just a short distance away.
There's often a small area, perhaps not bigger than a couple of counties, of heavy snow embedded within the larger area of precipitation. It is very difficult to pinpoint exactly where this area will occur in advance. That is why we give ranges and probabilities, and that is what we mean when we say isolated higher amounts.
Not all storms are the same. Some storms affect different areas in different ways, and even weaker storms can produce big impacts. The Winter Storm Severity Index is a product that uses threat levels to depict overall anticipated impacts to society due to winter weather.
You can be a citizen scientist. You can report the weather that is occurring at your location any time of day. Local National Weather Service forecast offices offer Skywarn Storm Spotter training, so you can become an official Skywarn Storm Spotter. The MPing app and website allows you to submit your report online. And for the most dedicated, you can join CocoRaws, where you can submit your daily precipitation report directly to the National Weather Service. Your ground truth helps us improve forecasts.
Did you know that a 1 to 2 degree temperature difference either at the surface or just a few hundred feet off the ground can make a big difference in whether we get rain, freezing rain, sleet, or snow? That's really hard to forecast when we don't have a lot of data, but thankfully we do have 92 upper air stations that release weather balloons at least twice a day.
Even if you live in warmer climates, it's important to know your winter precipitation types when traveling. Freezing rain is liquid rain that freezes when it hits the ground, creating a coat of ice on roads, walkways, trees, and power lines. Sleet is rain that freezes into ice pellets before reaching the ground.
Snow squalls are quick, intense bursts of heavy snow that are accompanied by gusty winds. They rapidly reduce visibility and can create treacherous travel. Snow squall warnings are issued for localized areas where snow squalls are expected in the next 30 to 60 minutes. As of December 2019, they are now sent as one of the wireless emergency alerts.
Know the differences between watches, warnings, and advisories. A winter storm warning means that confidence is high that a winter storm will produce heavy wintry precipitation and cause significant impacts. A winter storm watch means that confidence is medium and that a winter storm producing significant impacts is possible. A winter weather advisory means to exercise caution as light amounts of wintry precipitation will cause slick conditions and may impact travel.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and let's take a look now at the sea ice edge. Ice is extensive throughout the Arctic coast and down through the Chukchi Sea. Main concern is these brisk northeast to north winds continuing through the lower Chukchi Sea. These gale force winds could cause the ice to shift around a bit and open up some polynyas, especially pulling at that shore fast ice, so be aware of that danger. Otherwise, the ice will continue to drift south and westward here into the day on Monday, already now in the vicinity of St. Matthew Island. And we do expect, again, that trend to continue at least early in the week. Now, for the inner channels of the Panhandle, southeast winds 15 knots, Ketchikan up through Petersburg, waves 3 to 5 feet. Lynn Canal, still north wind 10 knots, 2-foot waves. Outer coast, strongest winds will be upwards once you get west of Gustavus, Yakutat, 20 to 30 knot winds there from the southeast. Waves generally running right around 10 feet. And on Tuesday, a frontal band will be moving into the area from the west and southwest with additional precipitation, rain and snow. Look for southeast winds 20 knots through the middle and lower channels, with waves of 4 to 7 feet down there toward Dixon Entrance. North winds 20 knots, 4-foot waves, Lynn Canal. And then the outer coast winds generally 25 knots from the south, turning southeasterly with waves anywhere from 14 to as high as 18 feet there off of Sitka. And then on Monday for the northwestern Gulf, 35 knot southeast gales there, well south of Cordova in the northwestern corner of the Gulf. We're looking at east winds 25 knots, Prince William Sound waves 6 feet. Lower Cook Inlet, northeast to east winds 25 knots with waves of 6 feet or so. And then on Tuesday, winds will continue northeast in Prince William Sound at about 15 knots with 3-foot waves. Along the Kenai coast, as you get offshore, 20-knot northeast winds with 10-foot waves, and then lower in Middle Cook Inlet, north to northwest winds at 25 knots and waves again around 6 feet. Around Kodiak Island, there's a weak low pressure circulation. Winds will generally be out of the east ahead of that, 20 knots. Turning southwesterly as you get south of Sand Point. Waves 11, 12, 13 feet there on the North Pacific southwest portion of the Gulf. Bristol Bay, south winds 15 knots, 2-foot waves, variable winds 10 knots, waves 3 feet there north of Cold Bay. And then on Tuesday, look for generally northwest to west winds across the region, strongest 25 to 30 knots on the North Pacific side, but 20 knots or so with 5 to 7-foot waves from Bristol Bay down to north of Cold Bay. The Aleutian chain will see winds as much as 25 to 30 knots out of the west on the North Pacific side with waves of 15, 16 feet. On the Bering side, northwesterly winds 20 to as high as 30 knots there just north there of Atka. Waves 7 feet there near Dutch Harbor, 12 feet to Atka through Adak. And on Tuesday, we'll see more of a northerly component to the wind, still westerly 20 knots, the far eastern Aleutians, but turning with more of a northwest or even northeasterly component, especially once you get west of Atka. Waves 11 to 13 feet on the North Pacific side and 8 to 10 feet on the Bering side. Stronger winds coming across the ice between the Yukon Delta and St. Lawrence Island, upwards of 40 knots. Again, that ice could shift around. Otherwise, where there is open water, waves 6 to as high as 9 feet there west of St. Matthew. And on Tuesday, northerly component to the wind continues with 35-knot winds there off of the Yukon Delta between there and St. Lawrence, 15-knot north winds in Norton Sound, and northwest winds 20 knots around St. Paul with waves of 7 feet. Finally, along the Arctic coast, we expect northeast winds 20 to 25 knots with ice. Strongest winds, though, will be from Cape Lisburne, Point Hope, out over the lower Chukchi Sea, through the Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence Island, the west side of the Seward Peninsula. Gale force winds upwards of 40 knots could cause that shifting of ice. And then on Tuesday, winds out of the east-northeast along the Arctic coast, Katovik over toward Utqiagvik, with ice in place, but still north winds upwards of 30 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait to 35-knot gales there on the north side of St. Lawrence Island and west of Port Clarence, again causing perhaps some of that ice, some of that shorefast ice to break away or shift around. Now, as far as low pressure is going to get consolidated here south of the Alaska Peninsula and in through the Gulf. By the time we get into Tuesday, it'll be a little stronger low with an occluded front with a couple waves of low pressure along that's really going to enhance the precipitation, impacting areas of the Panhandle as well as along the Gulf Coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.